Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm here to talk about what's known as a TIGGER analyses, but the broader initiative is a roadmap to 2035. And so I'll give a pretty high level overview and then welcome points of connection with your work and any additional details I can provide here or following up. So the roadmap to 2035, I'll talk about the purpose, a little bit of the underlying motivation, and some of our expected outcomes. So the roadmap is intended to provide recommended actions from across Oregon sectors to help achieve Oregon's greenhouse gas reduction goals for 2035 for consideration by the governor and the legislature to take next steps. So this work does a few different things, and one of the main parts of the process that we're working on right now is taking stock of major actions that are underway to significantly reduce emissions. We're doing this to clearly identify the gap, and then we're identifying equity-focused and financially realistic actions that can complement those efforts and address the gap. So the Oregon Global Warming Commission is serving as a steering committee for both the process and the analyses used to develop the roadmap. So if you come to the commission meetings over the last fall and well into this year, it's going to be a major agenda item that we discuss. ODO is supporting this work because we staff the commission and we're providing analysis, project management, and then we're also coordinating with our state agencies and other stakeholders. And this work, we're very grateful that we have support from the U.S. Climate Alliance, to bring on energy modeling experts from the Sustainability Solutions Group. So many on this call have already been in touch with them through our discussions we've had with agencies. So here I just want to give an overview of the various components of this work. As I noted, one main reason we're doing this is to identify actions beyond those that are already occurring. And those are significant actions that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. We are evaluating not only the reduction potential in emissions, but the cost effectiveness, and we're analyzing the associated co-benefits. And that's something that's really new in these type of analyses that other states are doing. So I'll be talking about that a little bit more later on in my slide deck. So what we've been doing is we've been bundling actions, individual actions, into broader scenarios. And you can think of those as pathways to meet the 2035 greenhouse gas reduction goal. We developed 3 different scenarios or pathways that use different bundles of those actions to meet the goal. And these reflect the range of scenarios that we heard from the commission and also from our stakeholders. So the first one is maximum electrification. And it relies on broadly electrification to meet our goals through renewable energy, transportation electrification, and industrial electrification. At the same time, clean hydrogen and renewable natural gas also play a role in that scenario. In the second scenario, alternative fuels, it relies much more on clean hydrogen and RNG and other alternative fuels to meet the goal. And electrification is still involved. So you can think of it as a scale between electrification and alternative fuels. And the balance is what varies between those 2 scenarios. The third is rapid transformation. And this really is just accelerating the timeline that we meet our goal by 5 years. So instead of 2035, we need it by 2030. And to accomplish this, we're very much needing to use all the tools in the toolbox to accelerate and expand actions in the previous 2 scenarios. And of course, there are overlapping actions within those 3. On that note, in developing the scenarios, we identified particular common themes related to natural working lands, materials, and energy efficiency. So these are common actions throughout our scenarios that we want to use because they're smart investments and they have high co-benefits. For example, we include materials because these recycling, reuse, and reduce actions are best practices, and there's great analysis at DEQ on this work. We include energy efficiency because it's Oregon's priority resource, its costs are low. it has minimal environmental impacts, and it's abundant. And we include natural working lands because of the work the commission did throughout last year to develop a proposal on sequestration actions that could be pursued. So here I'm showing a MAC curve, and this is one of the outputs of this work. Once we select the actions in each scenario, we'll need to determine how much reductions in emissions each action is expected to produce and how cost effective it is. And so this is known as a marginal abatement cost curve for each of the scenarios. It's really just an economic analysis, a snapshot that orders actions based on their cost effectiveness. So the dollars per metric ton reduced is what's showing along the y-axis. Actions that create savings extend below that zero cost baseline in the middle. And those that have a cost extend, a net present cost, extend above that zero cost line towards the right-hand side of this slide. So MAC curve is also showing on the horizontal or x-axis the amount, the quantity of emissions reductions created by an action. So the wider an action is on that scale, the more emissions we can expect, and the narrower is the opposite. Because we haven't done this analysis yet, this is just an illustrative example that our consultant generated for, I believe it was the city of Toronto, a different community, but we expect to see something like this that's based on Oregon's context, data, and modeling from other agencies. So I just want to note that this is one of the novelties of this work. Almost always these types of analyses stop with the economic analysis, and climate action plans from across the US are typically developed using only the cost effectiveness and amount of emissions reductions as inputs. But we really wanted the roadmap to be informed by more than that. We wanted to include a co-benefits and co-harms perspective to help with a clean energy transition. So on that note, here are some of the main buckets that we're considering for that. This is an analysis that will be following the guidance from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And how you do something like this is develop an indicator that has data available to be aggregated and measured at the county level. So we've been lucky to have really great information from OHA to help inform this work, and coordinating with DEQ, who's been working other types of information for CPP, et cetera. So this is going to be a central piece of how actions are holistically evaluated by the commission when the development of the roadmap is complete. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, this is obviously a really important part of this exercise to ensure that it reflects both the best available information from the state and many partners on this call, and that it can best serve Oregonians. So the roadmap has been developed. We've had multiple rounds of conversation with state agencies. There's nuanced data that continues to evolve quickly in this space. And to date, we've had 9 commission meetings and subcommittee meetings on this topic, and we'll be having additional public comment, public meetings for public comment, and more rounds of interviews with agencies. And I think that brings me to about my last slide here on the next steps. We've been spending more time than we initially expected on the analyses. Right now, we're focusing on the businesses planned, and that's to, like I said, just make sure we are using the best available information and reflecting the changes that are happening as we speak, as legislation unfolds. So the next step is to finalize both the cost benefits work and the co-benefits work, and then have additional public meetings and present findings so that the commission can evaluate, using all of that information, recommendations for the governor and the legislature. So I hope that was a good overview for you, and I'm happy to answer questions and help follow up with any details that might be helpful to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Maya. Any questions out there?
I have a question.
Oh, Cody. Hi, Cody. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, Maya, thanks for this. I'm always a little curious when you do those MAC curves, what year are you looking at? I'm just kind of like the assumptions on like what the fuel mix might be, or the, is it a future year, or is it the present year? Is it past?
Yeah, so I can go back to that slide if you'd like, just for a visual while we're talking about it. But it's supposed to be a net present value over a period of time. So because we are focusing on 2035, I believe it will be from the present day until that period, and the series of payments until then. And so those costs include operational costs, investment costs, and other savings that can accrue during that. So what our consultant does is they have a database that has financial information from other case studies, but we're also updating it with the Oregon context. And if there's additional information that you think would be of value for this, we would love to incorporate it as you see fit and what fits with their model, because we really hope that this is reflective of multiple efforts going on at the state.
Yeah, I guess what I asked is, I just feel like when I see like active transportation and the mode shift stuff, it just, in present day, that's going to give you a lot more bang for your buck, I feel like, in, reducing driving from the 4 million internal combustion engines on the road. But as the fleet gets cleaner and the fuels get kind of more, less carbon intensive in the future, then I can see that having a less, benefit there. So I was just kind of curious as to like how, at what data point you measure some of this. Seems like it would really impact the effects.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I can confirm that with our consultants, but I'm pretty sure that that would be taken into account, because when you do a net present value, it segregates by year and then takes that all into consideration, and they have a dynamic model. So I'd be really surprised if it was just for two different snapshots of time. That's not my understanding of how it works, but I'd be happy to just triple confirm that for you, for your utility.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm just making a note. Thanks for the question.
I have a question, Brian.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so Maya, so this, I know you said that this was an illustrative sort of chart. So if we have a scenario where, say, we implement, statewide congestion pricing, right? And so we essentially price travel on freeways across the state or something like that. And so that pricing generates revenue that we could, in theory, reinvest, say, in, I know this is not legal right now, but we could reinvest in, infrastructure, active transportation, transit. Are you able to kind of then draw that, to reflect that in these charts and draw down, say, the cost or the positive cost implications of some of those above the x-axis categories? Are you able to reflect kind of those, those dependencies in a chart like this, do you think?
So if I'm following your question, sorry, are you asking, are we going to have a,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so like if we implemented pricing, we would, we could impact sort of traveler behavior and, impact sort of GHG sort of that way, but we could also generate revenue in which we could use that revenue to invest in some of these more cost intensive strategies to bring those costs down, is essentially what I'm saying is. So how easy is it to reflect kind of those dynamics in a chart like this? And so,
yeah, that's really interesting. So I think this would probably better serve as a guide for you or others to see where you could invest that revenue. So I think
Okay.
this is too much of a snapshot in terms of seeing, you know, these are some of the actions that you could generate revenue by, perhaps, depending, again, this isn't for Oregon at this point, and get a better sense of what are those more cost intensive actions. So I don't think in this iteration that feedback loop would really work, but I will say that we have interest from others to generate a 2.0. It's difficult, as I'm sure you understand, when you go through a project like this, the process is as valuable, and we want to make sure, you know, things are just changing so quickly that it's updated. So maybe that would be part of the evolution of the information. But I think it's probably safest for me to say that that would not be a part of what we can produce this year. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Tara, so you've got a question there.
You're on mute.
Yes, that pesky thing. So piggybacking on what Chris said, this is where I struggle with these MAC curves, right? And I think we've talked about this, Maya, that's why you have this sort of scenario analysis separate, because for pricing, what is the price, right? This is like return for spending on something, and there's not that much spending on, you know, although we have to put, you know, toll gantries and things like that, there's not as much spending. So it's a challenge to put policies in here, and we're finding policies are some of the most effective things that we can do if we have the political will to do them and towards as to reaching these goals. But I think you're doing the scenario analysis as well, which allows you to get to some of those. So wanted to clarify that for this audience. The other connection I wanted to make is I think you guys spoke with the Oregon Global Warming Commission yesterday, and some of the questions that came up around population forecasts in Metro. Chris Johnson is probably a really good connection for you to make sure you're doing right by those population forecasts in Portland, because they're a little bit different than the PSU forecasts.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Tara, for connecting those dots. And there are multiple threads that I'm on today about those population forecasts. So we'll absolutely, we have a nice to-do list to circle back on some of those information sources. So definitely doing due diligence there. And
right. And I think this crowd really appreciates, I know Brian Dunn and I have had lots of conversation about trying to keep up with all the crazy vehicle and fuel regulations and rule changes and such, that you definitely got an earful of some of those yesterday. So the ink's not even dry on some of them, and we need to be, you know, reporting out to people what the impacts are. So.
Like the infrastructure bill, et cetera.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, definitely exciting time.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Maya from anyone? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you, Maya. We appreciate the presentation. It'll be interesting to see how some of this work plays out for you in the future. Tara, did you have one last thing?
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to make a positive announcement on this front with those vehicles and fuels. So we had this goal of the governor to pass 50,000 electric vehicles registered in the DMV, light duty vehicles. And I'm pretty sure we passed that in the last probably month or so. I know that was supposed to be in 2020. We're now in 2022. But you know, we're on our way, and I think we can't pick up a paper anymore without reading that we're moving in that direction. So just want to share that.
That's nice.
Really exciting. Thank you so much.